There's a peculiar, suffocating hush that descends on a courtroom right before a life is about to change. In Boulder County Courthouse, under the flat gaze of fluorescent lights and with the Rocky Mountains looming in the distance beyond frosted windows, Savannah Monroe stood alone. She was 38 years old, with a mess of wind-tossed brown hair pinned in haste, sharp eyes gone hollow from sleepless nights, and hands that trembled as she tried to keep them still. Savannah's fate now hung in the stale air. She was about to be sentenced for embezzlement, a crime she insisted she didn't commit. A crowd packed the gallery, drawn by scandal and spectacle. Lawyers shuffled papers, the prosecutor leaned back in his chair like a man certain of victory, and the judge, an older woman with steel-gray hair and eyes to match, read through a stack of files with deliberate, exhausting patience. The bailiff, stoic and stone-faced, shifted his weight by the double doors, watching Savannah with a gaze that said he'd seen hundreds pass through, and most never came back. "Miss Monroe," the judge intoned, her voice echoing off the stone, "do you have anything to say before I pass sentence?" Savannah glanced at her public defender, a young, nervous man named Tyler who'd done his best, but best seemed thin against the power of evidence and public opinion. All that was left to her was a single final request, and it made her chest ache with longing and dread at once. She swallowed, hearing her own voice shake. "Your Honor, before anything else, I'd like to see my horse." Midnight. A collective, puzzled gasp rippled through the crowd. Even the prosecutor blinked, caught off guard by the absurdity. The judge's eyebrow arched, but she didn't immediately dismiss it. Instead, she considered Savannah, perhaps remembering some rumor from the pre-trial interviews about the woman's connection to horses. "Your horse?" the judge repeated, voice tinged with skepticism. "Please, ma'am," Savannah said, the words falling out with all the desperation she'd held back. "He's in the courthouse stables, brought here as evidence for the auction. Midnight's all I have left. Just let me say goodbye." For a moment, the judge seemed ready to refuse. But then, perhaps out of pity or curiosity, she nodded to the bailiff. 5 minutes. In the hall outside this chamber, under supervision. If this is some kind of stunt, Miss Monroe, it's not, Your Honor, thank you." Savannah's eyes welled, but she held it back, not wanting the crowd, or her accusers, to see her break. Within minutes, the scene shifted. Savannah's handcuffs clicked, the doors creaked open, the corridor was even colder, an industrial stretch of concrete and steel. Down the hall, by a back entrance, stood a black stallion, tall, proud, but marked by a jagged scar along his left shoulder, a living reminder of the wildfire that had nearly claimed both his life and hers. Midnight's nostrils flared, his eyes wide but calm. He didn't flinch at the guards or the murmur of curious onlookers. Instead, he fixed his gaze on Savannah, as if the rest of the world was just a fog that separated them. A trembling breath escaped her lips. "Hey, boy," she whispered, her voice catching as she stepped closer, chains rattling at her wrists. The handler held the lead rope tight, but gave her just enough slack. The hallway faded away. Savannah reached out, laying a gentle hand against Midnight's muzzle, feeling the familiar warmth and the quiet power beneath the glossy black coat. For one suspended second, it was just them, two survivors, bound by a year of silence, suffering, and stubborn hope. Midnight nudged her gently, then with more insistence. Savannah frowned, noticing a strange pressure at her side. He was pushing at something beneath her coat, something she didn't recall placing there. Her fingers followed his nudge, and she found a folded sheet of paper, worn and creased, wedged between her belt and the lining of her jacket. Her eyes darted to the handler. He seemed oblivious, distracted by a call on his radio. Savannah unfolded the paper with shaking hands, her heart pounding so loudly it drowned out the world. It was covered in numbers, columns, dates. Handwriting she recognized from late nights in the barn office, poring over financial logs. Logs that should have been part of her defense. Logs that had vanished when her life turned upside down. She pressed the paper close, swallowing the sob that threatened to escape. Midnight stamped his hoof, the sharp sound reverberating through the hallway. A signal, a warning, or maybe just his way of urging her to act. Back in the courtroom, Savannah's return brought a shift. She carried herself differently now, eyes burning with a strange, wild hope. Tyler, her lawyer, caught the signal and demanded an immediate halt to sentencing. The judge, already weary of drama, demanded to know what was going on. Savannah spoke, her voice barely above a whisper, but charged with resolve. "I have new evidence, Your Honor. Financial logs, missing ones. They were never included in the investigation." Midnight. He found them. The entire courtroom seemed to pause. The collective breath sucked out of the room. The prosecutor barked a protest. The bailiff tensed. But the judge cut through the noise. "Bring it here." Tyler delivered the paper, hands shaking as badly as Savannah's. The judge studied the logs, frown deepening. There was a strange silence, the sort that only happens when the truth is about to shift everything. "Where did you get these?" the judge demanded. Savannah, voice rough with emotion, replied, "They were hidden. Midnight found them, under my coat. I don't know how he—" The judge silenced her with a raised hand. "I will decide what's admissible. For now, sentencing is delayed. Court is adjourned until further notice. Bailiff, return the defendant to holding. Counsel to my chambers, now." As Savannah was led away, the crowd exploded in whispers. The judge's gavel sounded like a gunshot, snapping everyone back to reality. Savannah didn't look back at the faces twisted with doubt or contempt. She focused on the fading echo of Midnight's hoofbeats, a heartbeat in the void, a promise that maybe, just maybe, the truth still had a chance. Outside the chamber, Midnight stood tall, eyes fixed on Savannah as she disappeared around the corner. In his steady, unblinking gaze, she saw what no one else could: faith, memory, and a silent verdict, waiting for the world to catch up. Courtroom drama lingered in the stale air, echoing in Savannah's mind as she was led back to the holding cell. The clang of steel doors felt both final and strangely hopeful. Something had changed, even if only a little. As the cell door slammed shut, Savannah sank onto the hard bench, clutching the creased financial log to her chest. Her hands shook, the scent of horsehair and paper lingering on her fingertips. Outside, legal chaos erupted. Her lawyer, Tyler, rushed between court clerks and the judge's chambers, waving the new evidence and fighting for a stay of sentencing. The prosecution, red-faced and caught off guard, scrambled to review the paper's authenticity. Even the bailiff, usually indifferent, shot her a wary look through the barred window. Inside the cell, Savannah relived every moment leading up to this: the courtroom, the hush when she'd asked for Midnight, the way he'd pressed the paper into her side, as if he understood everything, the stakes, the injustice, the hope she barely dared feel. She smoothed out the wrinkled logbook page, trying to steady her breathing. "He never forgot," she whispered, thinking of Midnight's haunted, intelligent eyes. How many times had she spoken to him late at night, confiding secrets and regrets she couldn't share with anyone else? And now, he'd given her back the very thing that might save her life. Suddenly, the cell door scraped open. Tyler burst in, still breathless, tie askew. "Savannah, listen. The judge is delaying sentencing. She wants time to verify this. You gave us a lifeline. Where did you get this paper? Savannah hesitated, afraid her answer would sound crazy. Midnight found it. It was hidden in my coat lining. He nudged it out. I think someone put it there. Maybe when they were prepping him for the courthouse auction. Or maybe, I don't know. Maybe it's luck. Tyler stared at her, then shrugged. However it happened, it's our shot. He glanced around, lowering his voice. Savannah, this log is huge. It traces a payment to an account under Everett Cole's name, the guy who ran the so-called horse sanctuary. That's our first real lead. If we can prove this money trail, it could show you we're set up. A wave of adrenaline coursed through Savannah. Cole. She remembered the name from whispered stories at the rescue. Rich, well-connected, always just out of reach whenever something went wrong. She'd never trusted him, not even before the fire that changed everything. You have to push the judge for a real investigation, Savannah said, voice trembling but insistent. Those logs, they were never admitted as evidence. I asked for them over and over, but the police said they disappeared. If someone hid them, it means someone wanted me to go down for this. Tyler nodded, eyes gleaming with purpose. I'll push, and I'll get my investigator on Cole's background, especially his finances. In the meantime, sit tight. Don't talk to anyone but me. We're not out of the woods, but for the first time, I think we actually have a path forward. As Tyler hurried out, Savannah slumped against the wall, her thoughts a blur of fear, hope, and disbelief. She couldn't let herself hope too much, not yet, not until she was truly free. But in her pocket, the crumpled page felt like a pulse, alive with possibility. Underscore, 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 underscore. Elsewhere in a corner of the courthouse's basement garage, a pair of animal control officers guided Midnight back to his holding pen. The big stallion moved with a fluid, wary grace, ears twitching at every unfamiliar sound. One of the officers, a young woman named Kelly, paused to stroke his mane. You're a good boy, aren't you? Caused quite the scene up there, she murmured. Midnight snorted softly and stamped his hoof, restless. Kelly noticed a faint, fresh scratch on his side. Probably from the hurried transfer to the courthouse, she thought. But the sight gave her pause. She glanced around, suddenly uneasy, as if someone had been there before her. The pen's latch had been tampered with, slightly bent. She made a mental note to mention it to security, then turned back to Midnight, brushing away the thought. Back in her cell, Savannah pressed the page flat on her knee, reading the numbers again and again. Every detail was familiar. The rescue's old account number, payroll for workers, supply orders, and then a series of odd transfers. They'd been marked as sanctuary improvements, but the routing numbers led somewhere else. One jumped out at her, a wire transfer to a shell company linked to Everett Cole. That name again and again, written in scrawled initials. She closed her eyes, remembering the first day she'd arrived at the horse rescue, desperate to escape the wreckage of her life. She'd been broken then, just like Midnight. And Cole, he'd welcomed her, promised a fresh start, all while running something darker beneath the surface. A sudden memory seized her. Cole's voice, slick and oiled, always speaking just a little too quietly when others were near. Some things are best left buried, Savannah, he'd said once, standing outside the barn, staring at the horizon, as if he could see right through her. She shuddered. underscore 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 outside the courthouse. The local news vans circled, sniffing out the next headline. Tyler emerged to a flurry of questions, refusing comment but looking more energized than he had in weeks. He ducked into a payphone alcove, dialing a private investigator he knew from his days as a public defender. Follow the money. Focus on Everett Cole and anyone connected to him at the sanctuary, he hissed into the receiver. Get me anything on missing files, tampered evidence, bribed cops. If Savannah's telling the truth, there's a lot more buried here. Inside, Savannah heard footsteps echoing in the hallway. A guard stopped at her door, sliding a dinner tray through the slot. Eat up. Court resumes tomorrow. Could be your lucky break, Monroe, he grunted. Savannah barely touched the food. Instead, she took the log page, folded it carefully, and tucked it inside her pillow. She lay down, staring at the ceiling. In her mind, she pictured midnight, safe but alone, waiting for her somewhere out there. She whispered into the dark, as if he could hear her from miles away. Thank you, Midnight. You remembered. You always remember. A single tear slid down her cheek. Not from fear, but from the fierce, aching hope that maybe, just maybe, she was not as alone as the world wanted her to believe. And somewhere in a dark stable, a black stallion tossed his head and settled down, as if answering a call no one else could hear. 1 year earlier, Savannah Monroe's world was smaller, confined to a 2-bedroom apartment in downtown Denver, suffocating beneath the weight of losses she couldn't name out loud. Her career as a finance officer had crashed in a storm of office politics and exhaustion. Her marriage had ended quietly, like the final hiss of a campfire left out in the rain. She'd lost her mother to cancer the previous fall. By winter, she woke up each morning to an apartment full of silence and a heart too heavy for hope. She needed an escape, a place to breathe again. On a whim, scrolling late at night through community listings, Savannah found an ad. Volunteers needed, wildfire horse rescue, Boulder foothills, no experience necessary, room and board provided. Must love horses. The words kindled a distant memory of childhood summers on her uncle's farm. Maybe, she thought, this was a sign. So she packed her bags, left her resignation letter on the counter, and drove west toward the foothills, following a winding 2-lane road past scorched pines and the charred skeletons of barns lost in the recent wildfires. The sanctuary was a patchwork of patched fences, muddy fields, and battered outbuildings. It smelled of smoke, hay, and something deeper, suffering, hope, and secrets. Her first day was a haze of introductions. Everett Cole, the sanctuary's founder, greeted her with a too-wide smile and an oily handshake. "You'll be working in the lower barn with the new rescues," he'd said, voice pleasant but eyes calculating. "Don't mind the mess. They come in rough, but we do what we can." Savannah met the rest of the crew, grizzled ranch hands, college students on gap years, a few weary women rebuilding their own lives through hard work and second chances. She was handed a pair of battered boots and told to start with the feeding rounds. That's when she first saw Midnight. He stood in the last stall of the old barn, a black stallion, larger than any horse she'd ever seen, his flanks marred by a patchwork of scars. He moved like a shadow, silent, every muscle taut. When Savannah approached, he retreated to the far corner, ears pinned flat, eyes rolling white with fear. "He's trouble," muttered one of the grooms, shaking her head. "Won't let anyone close. Came in after the big fire up on Fox Ridge. Lost half his herd. Barely made it out alive." But Savannah was drawn to him. Each evening, after the feeding and mucking were done, she lingered by his stall, leaning on the rails and speaking softly. She didn't expect answers. She just needed someone, anyone to listen. Sometimes she read aloud from battered library books. Other times, she just sat in silence, letting her breathing slow until it matched the steady rhythm of his own. The bond formed slowly. Days turned into weeks. Midnight began to inch closer, one cautious step at a time, until one dawn she woke to find him standing outside her cabin window, silent as a specter, watching over her as she slept. His presence was comforting and uncanny, like he was keeping vigil, protecting her from nightmares only he could sense. Savannah's routine became a ritual. Every night, she whispered her worries to midnight. Every morning, he greeted her with a gentle huff, nudging her shoulder before following her to the fields. In time, she dared to reach out, brushing the coarse, tangled mane from his eyes, feeling the pulse of life beneath his scars. But the barn itself felt haunted. There were whispers among the staff, hints that the fire that brought midnight to the sanctuary hadn't been an accident. Some said they'd seen figures moving through the smoke, heard explosions before the flames reached the ridge. Equipment disappeared, records were tampered with, and twice Savannah found padlocks snapped clean off the feed room door. Each time she raised her concerns, Cole brushed them aside. "We're stretched thin, Savannah. Probably just kids from town messing around. Leave it to me." But she couldn't leave it alone. Midnight grew restless at night, pacing his paddock, nostrils flaring, eyes wild. More than once, Savannah found him staring toward the hills, body tense, as if remembering something terrible and unfinished. One night, as a thunderstorm raged over the foothills, Savannah was jolted awake by frantic banging on her cabin door. It was Carmen, the night watch volunteer, her face pale and panicked. "Something's wrong in the barn," she gasped. Savannah grabbed her raincoat and flashlight and sprinted across the field, heart thundering in her chest. The old barn was filled with smoke, not from fire but from some kind of chemical, sharp and stinging. Horses stampeded in their stalls, eyes rolling with terror. Midnight was at the center, kicking at his door, screaming, a sound so raw and human it chilled Savannah's blood. Together, she and Carmen flung the doors open, leading horses out into the pouring rain one by one. When it was finally safe, Savannah found Midnight trembling but alive, his flanks slick with sweat. On the barn floor, by his empty stall, she found a broken lantern and a pile of charred rope. The sheriff ruled the fire accidental, blaming faulty wiring and old kerosene lamps, but Savannah's gut twisted with doubt. Why was the door to the feed room forced open, but nothing stolen? Why did the horses all panic at once? And why, days later, did Cole instruct her to forget what she saw and get back to work? Late that night, after the chaos had settled, Savannah sat in the mud beside Midnight, arms wrapped around his neck. His breathing synced with hers, each slow exhale driving away a little more fear. She pressed her forehead to his, whispering, "I believe you remember. I believe you know what happened, even if you can't say it." In the darkness, something passed between them. A silent vow to seek the truth, no matter where it led. As rain beat on the roof and thunder rolled over the mountains, Savannah held on to Midnight, promising herself she wouldn't stop searching for answers. She owed him that much. She owed herself even more. The barn was ruled safe again. Life returned to its uneasy rhythm. But from that night forward, neither Savannah nor Midnight slept quite as soundly. There were secrets buried in those scorched beams, and both of them, woman and horse, scarred survivors, were bound together by the fire's unsolved mystery. And somewhere in the shadows, Savannah felt the chill of unseen eyes watching, waiting for her to dig too deep. The jail library was nothing like Savannah had imagined. There were no grand arches, no warm wood, or the smell of paper and dust. Instead, it was a concrete box, harsh fluorescent lights humming overhead, metal shelves lined with battered paperbacks and outdated encyclopedias. Still, for Savannah, it was an oasis. Books were freedom, windows into the world outside. Now, those shelves also offered her the only path to justice she had left. She clutched a scrap of paper, notes she'd scribbled during her first legal consultation, reminders of financial discrepancies and names she needed to follow up on. Tyler, her public defender, had managed to get her more library hours for research, arguing that it might help her defense. He was right, but the truth was, she'd barely slept since that night in the courtroom, not with the financial logs midnight had found burning a hole in her mind. Her first task was finding any mention of Everett Cole, the sanctuary's enigmatic founder. There were a few local newspaper clippings in a yellowed file folder, human interest stories about the sanctuary's post-fire recovery, a glowing interview with Cole about the miracle of Midnight's survival. But Savannah knew press pieces were often paid for and polished to shine away the truth. She hunted deeper, paging through state records and court dockets with shaking hands. Her focus sharpened when she stumbled on a name she half remembered. Walt Harris, a former ranch worker who had left the sanctuary months before Savannah arrived. She found a brief lawsuit, Harris suing Cole for unpaid wages and wrongful termination. The case had been settled quietly, out of court. In a rare moment of luck, Harris had left an address in the records. Savannah copied it down, passing the note to Tyler at their next legal meeting. "Can you get your investigator to find him?" she asked, barely above a whisper. Tyler nodded, his expression serious. "I'll try. Anything else?" "Yes," she hesitated. "Ask if Harris ever saw Midnight's file. I think there's something in it. Something nobody wants us to find." That afternoon, Savannah returned to the library. Her persistence paid off. A prison clerk, bored and secretly sympathetic, led her into the old archives room. The air was cold, thick with the smell of mildew. She dug through boxes of animal control reports, vet records, and rescue intakes. Finally, she found a manila folder stamped Equine, Midnight, Intake #19. Her hands trembled as she opened it. The first page was a standard intake form: species, age, estimated 8 years, gender, condition on arrival, burns, dehydration, trauma. The next page was more cryptic: a vet's note, specimen #19, failure to submit, survived fire, refuses sedation, unfit for controlled testing, recommend euthanasia. Savannah's stomach twisted. Testing. What kind of testing was a horse at a sanctuary undergoing? There was a photo, grainy and washed out, of Midnight as he'd first arrived. Emaciated, wild-eyed, mane ragged with soot. Across the bottom, someone had written, "Do not process, outlier." Savannah leafed through more notes: erratic behavior, failure to adapt, aggressive when restrained, escaped pen twice, no other injuries except fire trauma. And in red pen, a single line: move to secure location, do not notify owner. Her breath caught. Why hide a rescue horse's existence? Why all the coded language? At their next legal conference, Tyler arrived with news. "I got in touch with Walt Harris," he whispered, leaning close over the scratched table in the visitor's room. "He says Cole ran more than just a sanctuary. He had ties to a biotech startup out of state, one with a shady reputation for animal testing. Harris never had proof, but he saw men in lab coats coming and going, boxes of vials in the storage shed, and at least once a horse being loaded into a van at midnight, never to return." Savannah's mind raced. Did he ever see records on midnight? Tyler nodded. He said every horse got a file, but Midnight's was different. Locked up, marked confidential. He only caught a glimpse one night when Cole left the office door open, enough to see your stallion listed as specimen #19. He thought it was a joke until the barn fire. After that, he was fired for asking questions. Savannah gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles white. Tyler, Midnight was never just a rescue. He survived because he wasn't supposed to. That's why Cole targeted him. And me. We're threats to his operation. If we can prove Midnight was part of something illegal and that Cole covered it up, it could blow this case wide open. Tyler hesitated, then said, Savannah, are you sure you want to go down this road? Cole's got connections. This gets dangerous. Savannah's voice was low and resolute. I don't have a choice. Midnight trusted me. He risked everything to get those logs to me, one way or another. If I let this go, it all dies in the dark. I owe him more than that. For the next week, Savannah buried herself in research, piecing together a patchwork of shady financial trails, names that popped up in Cole's circle, references to the Sanctuary Project in grants and invoices. The more she found, the clearer the picture became. Midnight's resilience wasn't an accident. He'd survived the fire because someone meant for him to vanish, to never be found or questioned. She remembered those long, haunted nights after the barn fire, how Midnight would stand outside her cabin, as if guarding her from dangers she couldn't see. Now she understood. He had been living on borrowed time, kept alive only because he'd refused to submit, refused to be a victim or a pawn. One evening, as Savannah returned to her cell, a guard handed her a slip of paper. Another message from Tyler. Got the court to approve a motion to subpoena Cole's financials and vet records. Harris agreed to testify if we need him. Stay strong. You're not alone in this anymore. Savannah pressed the note to her chest, a surge of gratitude and purpose filling her. For the first time since her arrest, she believed there was a way out. Not just for herself, but for every animal, every volunteer, every truth buried by the likes of Everett Cole. That night, Savannah dreamed of Midnight, running wild and free through moonlit fields, his scars shining silver, his eyes fierce with memory. In her dream, she ran beside him, unafraid, racing toward the horizon where the secrets of the past could no longer hurt them. But when she woke to the cold reality of concrete walls and barred windows, Savannah did not despair. She had Midnight's story. She had the truth, and she would not let either be erased. The days inside Boulder County Jail bled into each other, each marked by the same pattern: gray dawn through the tiny barred window, the muffled clang of doors, and the distant hum of city life that Savannah could no longer touch. She was sustained now only by two things: the hope sparked by the evidence Midnight had delivered, and the fire of her own determination to see the truth finally rise above the lies that had smothered her life. But hope was a fragile thing behind bars. Each evening, as the guards did their rounds and the harsh lights dimmed, Savannah felt the weight of isolation press down on her like a stone. She found herself whispering to Midnight through the concrete, imagining him pacing restlessly in his holding pen, his sharp mind churning with memories only he could decipher. There were nights she almost believed she could hear him, the scrape of his hoof, the snort of his breath, a steady heartbeat calling through the dark. That loneliness was broken one night by an unexpected sound, a faint tap on the steel mesh of her cell door. Savannah was sitting cross-legged on the cot, leafing through her growing folder of notes and scraps from the jail library, when she heard it. She glanced up, expecting to see a guard on the late shift. But the figure standing just beyond the line of fluorescent light was cloaked, her features lost in the shadow cast by her hood. For a moment, Savannah thought she was dreaming. The woman stepped closer, her presence unnerving in its silence. Savannah tensed, but the visitor's voice, when it came, was a low, hurried whisper. "Don't call out. I don't have much time. My name is Lena." Savannah's mouth went dry. The name meant nothing to her, at least not yet. But something about Lena's posture, the tremor in her hands, set her nerves on edge. "How did you get in here?" she whispered back, heart pounding in her ears. "Doesn't matter," Lena replied, glancing over her shoulder at the shadowy corridor beyond. "I used to work at the sanctuary, in the stable. My job was to keep quiet, keep records, and do whatever Cole told me. I couldn't anymore. Not after what I saw." Her voice wavered, heavy with guilt and fatigue. "I heard you were arrested. I knew you were innocent. That's why I came." Savannah sat up straighter, disbelief warring with desperate hope. "If you know I'm innocent, you have to help me, please. Anything you can tell me." Lena nodded, fumbling in her satchel. "I don't have the answers to everything, but I know why they chose you to take the fall. Cole didn't trust outsiders, but he trusted those he thought he could control. When you showed up, honest and alone, he decided you'd make the perfect scapegoat if things ever went sideways. You had no family nearby, no one to fight for you. You were smart, but you kept to yourself. That's what made you dangerous to him, and expendable." The words stung, but Savannah recognized their bitter truth. "Why frame me at all?" she demanded. "Why not just bury the evidence and walk away?" Lena's gaze darted around the corridor. "Because Midnight saw everything. That fire wasn't an accident. Cole needed someone to blame, someone who looked just credible enough to fool the insurance companies and the donors. But it was all cover. Midnight was supposed to vanish in that fire. He was the last loose end from Cole's experiments. You saving him complicated everything." Savannah felt her blood run cold. Experiments? The word was a razor's edge, confirming her worst suspicions. Lena pulled a small envelope from her satchel and slid it through the bars. "Proof is hard to come by. Cole destroyed almost everything. But I saved this. It's a photo from the night of the fire. Midnight chained outside the charred stable, smoke everywhere. If you look close, you'll see something else. 2 men in the background, faces hidden, setting the fire. Midnight saw them. He remembers. And Cole knows it." Savannah's hands shook as she pulled out the photo, breath catching in her throat. The image was blurry and smoky, but the terror in Midnight's eyes was unmistakable. Behind him, in the infernal glow, shadowy figures worked fast, pouring accelerant. Their features turned away. Her mind reeled. The fire, the missing evidence, the relentless campaign to pin everything on her. "Midnight's survival put you in danger," Lena whispered urgently. "He wasn't just a rescue. He was a witness. Cole's men tried to finish the job after the fire. They couldn't. Midnight is clever, almost uncanny. He escaped every time they tried to corner him. That's why you ended up with the evidence. He brought it to you because he trusted you." Savannah blinked back tears, a cocktail of rage and gratitude churning inside her. "Why are you telling me this now?" Lena's eyes glittered with remorse. "Because I couldn't live with what I'd done. I helped cover it up. I cataloged the animals. I shredded documents. I stayed silent while you were arrested. But seeing you in the papers, hearing about the auction, the evidence, they're going to kill Midnight if they can't get rid of you first. Cole will do anything to protect himself." A wave of nausea swept over Savannah. "What should I do? I'm trapped in here." Lana glanced down the hall. The sound of footsteps echoed in the distance. You're not as alone as you think. Tyler's making progress on the outside. Walt Harris is ready to talk. And me, I'll do what I can. You have to hold on, Savannah. You have to survive this." Before Savannah could say another word, Lana stepped back, disappearing into the shadows. The click of a distant door signaled her escape, leaving Savannah alone with the burning photo and a heart thrumming with urgency. She studied the image again, memorizing every detail. Midnight, battered but unbroken, and the faceless men who'd tried to erase them both. The truth was no longer just a hope. It was a weapon, and Savannah intended to wield it with everything she had left. All that night, she barely slept. She replayed Lena's words over and over, feeling the sting of betrayal and the steel of purpose hardening inside her. They'd tried to break her, tried to destroy the only innocent witness left. But the fire had failed to kill Midnight. And now, through sheer will, it had failed to silence her. Morning came. The guards barked her name, leading her to yet another round of hearings and interrogations. Savannah kept the photo pressed to her chest, a hidden talisman. The system was still stacked against her, but she was no longer powerless. She was a survivor. So was Midnight. And now she was ready for the fight. For days, Savannah waited in the uncertain space between dread and hope. The evidence was mounting, but the system turned slowly, creaking with bureaucracy and resistance. The prison walls seemed to close in tighter with each passing hour. Outside, thunder rolled over Boulder, the summer sky shifting from blue to leaden gray. In Savannah's cell, the air felt thick, each breath drawn like a question with no answer. But change, when it finally arrived, came like a sudden downpour. Early one morning, Savannah was roused by the urgent rattle of keys and the gruff summons of a guard. "Lawyer's here. You've got an emergency meeting." Her mind raced. Had something happened to Tyler? Had Cole moved to silence another witness? Instead, as she was ushered into the visitation room, Savannah saw not just Tyler, but a vet in a rumpled denim jacket, flanked by a pair of stern-faced officers. At their side, impossible but real, stood Midnight, head high, his black coat gleaming under the fluorescent lights, eyes sharp and restless. Savannah's heart soared and stuttered at once. "Midnight? You brought him here?" Tyler nodded, the ghost of a smile breaking his anxious mask. "We petitioned the court. Midnight is now considered material evidence and, for the moment, he's in our custody. He was examined last night by Dr. Keene. She found something strange." Dr. Keene stepped forward, holding a small metal tag. "When I checked Midnight, I noticed an odd scar on his left shoulder, different from his burn wounds. I thought it was just another injury from the fire, but under the skin was this: a tracking device. Surgical grade, old model, disguised as a medical tag." Savannah's mind spun. A tracking device? Who would? Tyler's voice was grave. "Cole's crew, most likely. The vet said it's not the kind used for livestock. It's encrypted, records GPS data, and emits a faint pulse. We're running a forensic analysis, but already it pinged a remote location, an old stable on land that Cole used to own. We think there's more hidden there. Maybe the missing evidence. Maybe the link to the payments." Savannah reached out, brushing Midnight's muzzle with trembling fingers. His breath was warm, familiar, anchoring her against the tide of fear and fury. "He's been carrying it all this time," she murmured, voice thick with emotion. No wonder he was always so restless. Dr. Keene knelt beside Midnight, holding out her phone. "There's more. I ran a behavioral evaluation. Watch this." She played a recording. Everett Cole's voice, taken from a news interview, played through a small speaker. At the sound, Midnight's demeanor changed instantly, He reared slightly, ears pinned back, eyes wild. A deep, guttural neigh burst from his throat, a sound Savannah recognized not as fear, but as rage. He pawed the floor, stomping with deliberate force as if protesting some invisible threat. The officers exchanged glances. "That horse knows who hurt him," one muttered, more to himself than to anyone else. Tyler leaned in. "Savannah, we think Midnight remembers everything. He's not just evidence, he's a witness in his own way." The GPS log from the device led us to a location in the hills north of town. It's remote, an abandoned stable not far from where the fire started. Cole's name is still on the old lease. Savannah's mind raced through the timeline. The fire, the missing logs, the sudden vanishing of records, the relentless pressure to forget what she'd seen. You have to go there. Now. There might still be something left. Something that can prove all of this wasn't an accident. Tyler nodded, determination hardening his jaw. "We're assembling a team with the sheriff and Dr. Keene. Harris, the ex-ranch worker, is coming too. He remembers the property. But there's something else, Savannah. This device. It's been transmitting for months. Someone may know we're onto them. If Cole or his people realize what we're looking for." Savannah swallowed. "You have to hurry. If they get there first, it's all gone. Midnight brought you the truth. Don't let them take it away again." The officers prepared to leave, radioing for backup. Dr. Keene slipped the device into an evidence bag, her hands steady but her voice tight with urgency. "This could change everything, Miss Monroe. Animals don't lie. Midnight's trauma, his scars, they're all records, in their own way. And now, with this device, we might finally have the proof no one could ignore." Tyler put a reassuring hand on Savannah's shoulder. "We'll find it, I promise. And once we do, you're going home." Savannah fought back tears, overwhelmed by gratitude and terror in equal measure. "Please, take care of him. Midnight saved my life. I need to know he's safe." Tyler nodded. "He's in good hands. And so are you." As they left, Savannah pressed her hand to the glass, watching Midnight's powerful form disappear down the hallway. His ears flicked once as if sensing her gaze. In that fleeting moment, she felt the bond between them, wordless, unbreakable, and brimming with the memory of all they'd survived. Back in her cell, Savannah's mind spun with possibilities and fear. She replayed every detail: Midnight's fury at Cole's voice, the way he'd led them to clues even humans would have missed. If the law would not listen to her, maybe finally, they would listen to the silent testimony of a horse who had survived it all. Night fell, the jail echoing with distant thunder. Savannah lay awake, clutching her pillow, feeling for the first time in weeks the ember of hope burning brighter than her fear. Somewhere, out in the wild Colorado hills, truth was waiting to be uncovered. Hoofprints pressed into the dirt, memory written into scars, a map to justice carried by the most loyal witness she had ever known. And as the storm broke over Boulder, Savannah whispered a promise into the dark. "Hold on, Midnight. I'm coming back for you. We're not finished yet." The journey to the old Highland ranch was marked by a sense of tension so thick it seemed to vibrate in the summer air. Tyler gripped the steering wheel tightly, knuckles white, as the narrow mountain road twisted ever higher. Behind him, Dr. Keene rode in a pickup, the evidence bag containing Midnight's tracking device clutched to her chest. Walt Harris, the former ranch hand, followed on his motorcycle, old boots scuffed and mind-focused, ready to face ghosts he'd hoped never to see again. Midnight traveled in a stock trailer, oddly calm for a horse who'd survived so much chaos, as if he knew, somehow, that the end of the journey would bring long-awaited answers. The property looked abandoned, shrouded in wild sage and the stubborn weeds of neglect. A sagging wire fence outlined the border, and near the edge, a half-collapsed hay shed stood like a gravestone. The roof caved in, the boards weathered silver by sun and snow. The group pulled up quietly, the vehicle's engines dying in sequence. The only sound was the rustle of dry grass and the nervous huff of midnight as he was led from his trailer. Savannah was not present, but in spirit, she hovered over every step of the search. She'd entrusted Tyler with her hopes, her story, and her faith in Midnight's uncanny memory. Now, as he slipped the halter from the stallion's head and watched him sniff the air, Tyler prayed that Bond would lead them to the truth. Walt Harris nodded at the landscape. Last time I saw this place, it was alive with horses. Cole used to brag about his research facilities. None of us knew what he meant. But there, he said, pointing at the collapsed hay shed, is where the weirdest stuff happened. Cole kept everyone out, but I always saw lights at night. Midnight, sensing something in the air, tugged free from Tyler's grip and strode ahead, unhurried but focused. He picked his way through the knee-high weeds, past a rusted water trough and a line of old fence posts, one of which was broken, marked by a deep notch, as if it had been struck by hooves in panic years ago. Suddenly, Midnight stopped, pawed the earth beside the fence post, then stamped twice and whinnied, a sharp, piercing call that sent a shiver down everyone's spine. "That's it," Walt whispered. "He remembers." The group gathered around as Dr. Keene joined Midnight, who was now pawing insistently at a patch of ground where grass had never grown back. Tyler knelt, pulling on gloves. With hands shaking, he brushed away the dirt. Beneath an inch of dust and brittle straw was a warped metal plate, some kind of old hatch. It took all three of them to pull it aside, revealing a shallow cavity just large enough to hide a lockbox, rusted and battered, but still sealed. With a crowbar from the truck, Tyler pried open the lid. Inside, the stale air smelled of old leather, oil, and secrets. The contents were simple: a stack of USB drives in plastic sleeves, a bound veterinary log, and an embossed ledger wrapped in a waterproof bag. Dr. Keene snapped on a headlamp, careful fingers flipping through the log. Each page was marked with numbers, drug names, dosages, evidence of animal experiments done under the guise of sanctuary care. Savannah's name appeared several times as volunteer assigned to specimen #19. Walt exhaled, a curse slipping out under his breath. This is it. This is everything. Tyler, already dialing the sheriff on his cell, felt his heart pounding. He knew, as Savannah did, how fragile justice could be when set against powerful men like Cole. But this was incontrovertible. He scanned the ledger next. It was meticulous, dated, and signed. Financial transactions flowing from the sanctuary's main account to a network of shell corporations. Each payment was disguised as an animal welfare expense, but the amounts and destinations matched those Savannah had found in the missing logs. Near the end, in Cole's sharp handwriting, one chilling line stood out. "All loose ends to be closed. SM will be responsible in case of inquiry. Transfer out specimen #19. The realization washed over Tyler. Savannah had not only been framed, she had been chosen as a scapegoat well in advance. It was all here: the paper trail, the experiments, the plan to erase Midnight and bury the truth beneath layers of bureaucracy and fire. "Look at this," Dr. Keene said quietly, holding up a USB drive labeled with the sanctuary's logo. "If these contain surveillance or medical records, we might even have video proof." Just then, Midnight let out another neigh, pawing the ground with renewed energy, eyes fixed on Tyler. He seemed to demand action. a living witness who would not let the past stay buried. "Let's get all of this out of here," Tyler said, voice trembling with a mix of relief and anger. "We need to get this evidence to the sheriff and have it logged immediately. Savannah's running out of time." As they loaded the evidence, the wind picked up, rattling the dry grass and carrying the scent of sage and rain. In that moment, the old ranch felt transformed. Not just a scene of past crimes, but the threshold of justice. Midnight nuzzled Tyler's shoulder, as if to say, "Don't forget. Don't let them bury this again." Underscore, 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 underscore. At the Boulder County Jail, Savannah was called to the warden's office just before sunset, her mind spinning with worry. The warden, uncharacteristically somber, slid a phone across the desk. "Your attorney's on the line. He says it's urgent." Savannah's hands shook as she picked up. Tyler's voice was alive with hope, trembling with barely contained excitement. "We found it, Savannah. Midnight led us straight to a lockbox at the old ranch. Vet logs, financial ledgers, USB drives, all of it links Cole to the illegal testing and the frame job. We're taking it to the authorities now. We have what we need to clear your name." Savannah pressed the receiver to her ear, tears stinging her eyes. For a long moment, she couldn't speak. At last, her voice broke through, soft but steady. "Thank you, Tyler. Thank Midnight for me. And tell them, I never gave up." Underscore, 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 underscore. As darkness fell over Boulder, the little team drove back toward town, the evidence secure at last. Midnight, silent and watchful in his trailer, had done what no one else could. He'd carried the memories and secrets of the past right to the very edge of justice. In the coming days, the fight would shift to the courtroom. But for now, hope surged through Savannah, stronger than fear. The truth was no longer buried. It was rising, step by hoofbeat step, into the light. The day Savannah Monroe finally stood in court again, Boulder County buzzed with the energy of justice delayed but not denied. News of the stunning discovery at the old Highland Ranch, led by a black stallion and a dogged legal team, had spread through town like wildfire. Every seat in the courtroom was filled. Neighbors, volunteers from the horse rescue, journalists hunched over notepads, even a few of Cole's old associates who had slunk in, faces drawn tight with worry or guilt. Savannah had spent a sleepless night in her cell, nerves buzzing with anticipation and fear. Her heart pounded as she donned a borrowed blazer and entered the courtroom, flanked by 2 deputies. Every step felt both surreal and fateful. At the defense table, Tyler stood waiting, his posture tense but eyes full of hope. Across the aisle sat Everett Cole, still sharp in his tailored suit, but no longer the untouchable benefactor. His jaw was set, lips thin and eyes darting. He watched Savannah enter with a mix of disdain and, for the first time, genuine uncertainty. The federal agents sitting behind him were a silent reminder that his world was no longer safe. The judge, the same steely-eyed woman from Savannah's sentencing, wasted no time. "This court is reconvened to hear new evidence in the matter of Savannah Monroe, accused of embezzlement and conspiracy. Mr. Tyler, you may proceed." Tyler rose, his voice clear but tremulous with conviction. "Your Honor, over the past week, we have uncovered substantial new evidence. My client was framed for a series of crimes orchestrated by Everett Cole, who used the Boulder Equine Sanctuary as a front for animal testing, financial fraud, and ultimately, a cover-up of both by means of arson and destruction of records. He began by presenting the physical evidence. The vet logs, the detailed ledger, the USB drives now decrypted and cataloged by state investigators. Each exhibit was displayed on a large screen, the words and numbers stark against the sterile court lighting. The judge pored over every page, marking the payments, the fake invoices, the coded references to specimen #19, midnight. Tyler called Dr. Keene to the stand. She testified in measured expert tones, explaining the tracking device embedded in Midnight, the GPS data it contained, and her behavioral assessment. She described how Midnight had responded violently to the sound of Cole's voice, a reaction supported by the court's own video footage, which showed the horse neighing, stamping, and staring down Cole with raw, almost human recognition. The prosecution attempted to object, but the judge overruled them, her patience worn thin by the weight of the evidence. Next, Walt Harris testified, his hands steady on the rail. He spoke of late-night deliveries, the strange men in lab coats, the locked offices, and Cole's instructions to never ask questions. He described the night of the barn fire, the smell of accelerant, the quick-moving shadows, and the aftermath, when he was fired for poking around too closely. Every word painted a picture of a man whose decency had cost him his job, and who now found purpose in helping Savannah find her truth. Finally, Tyler asked to admit Midnight himself as a behavioral witness. The bailiffs led the black stallion carefully into the courtroom, where he stood tall and silent in the aisle, scars visible beneath his coat, eyes steady and unafraid. The room fell utterly silent. No one dared move or breathe as Midnight's presence filled the space with a gravity no words could match. Savannah remained quiet as Midnight's story was told through vet reports, videos, and the testimony of those who'd cared for him. His scars, burns from the fire, a healed incision from the device, were more persuasive than any speech. He stood unshaken as Dr. Keene played the recording of Cole's voice again, reacting with a low, rumbling neigh and a single deliberate stamp of his hoof. Even the most skeptical jurors could not look away. Cole, for the first time, seemed to shrink in his chair. Savannah watched it all unfold with a mix of awe and humility. She had been through hell, accused, isolated, almost broken. Yet here she was, vindicated not by power or privilege, but by the silent testimony of a horse who refused to forget. The dignity in Midnight's stance, the patience in his eyes, the scars that mapped a story of survival, these were the real arguments, undeniable and untainted. After hours of presentation, the judge called a brief recess. When she returned, her verdict was swift and clear. It is the judgment of this court that Savannah Monroe is innocent of all charges. The prosecution's case was based on fraudulent evidence and deliberate concealment orchestrated by Everett Cole. Effective immediately, Miss Monroe is exonerated of all criminal liability. The gallery erupted. Volunteers wept openly, the press scribbled furiously, and even the deputies allowed themselves small, relieved smiles. Savannah sat stunned, Tyler squeezing her hand as the weight finally began to lift. The judge turned her attention to Cole, her gaze now openly cold. "Mr. Cole, you are hereby remanded into federal custody, pending further investigation into charges of fraud, animal cruelty, and obstruction of justice. Officers, please escort the defendant out." Cole rose, protesting, but the agents were already at his elbows. The courtroom doors shut behind him with a finality that echoed down the long marble hallways. For a long moment, Savannah stayed seated, hands trembling. Then, as the deputies stepped aside, Midnight moved to her side, lowering his head. She pressed her forehead to his and closed her eyes, breathing in the scent of freedom, hope, and everything she had fought so hard to reclaim. Outside, sunlight spilled across the courthouse steps, and the crowd surged to greet Savannah and her team. The air was filled with the chatter of reporters, the laughter of old friends, and the steady, calming presence of Midnight, who walked beside her as if he'd always belonged there. For Savannah, the battle was over, but the war for justice, for animals, for the voiceless, for truth, had only just begun. As she hugged Tyler and thanked Dr. Keene and Walt Harris, Savannah looked down at Midnight and whispered, "We did it. You did it." And Midnight, steady as ever, nuzzled her shoulder, a silent acknowledgement from the witness whose memory had saved them both. It had been several months since Savannah Monroe's name was finally cleared. But the story didn't end with the verdict, or with the handcuffs snapping closed on Everett Cole's wrists. For Savannah, Midnight, and all those who had suffered in silence or stood up for the truth, life moved forward, not in the easy arc of a hero's journey, but in small, persistent steps of healing. On a golden autumn morning, Savannah found herself standing before a crowd at the Colorado Animal Ethics Conference in downtown Denver, her hands trembling not from fear, but from the weight of what she was about to share. The room was filled with veterinarians, animal advocates, law students, and families. At her side was a screen, ready to show the slideshow she'd prepared. In the front row, Dr. Keene smiled encouragingly, and Walt Harris sat with his arms folded, nodding his approval. But most important, at the side entrance, a familiar black stallion waited with two gentle handlers, his coat glossy under the soft lights. The audience quieted as Savannah stepped to the microphone. She paused, looking out at the sea of expectant faces, then pressed a button to begin her keynote address, titled, "Silent Memory: What Horses Teach Us About Truth." She began not with her own ordeal, but with a simple observation. Horses don't speak the way we do. They don't raise their hooves in courtrooms, and they don't testify with words. But they remember. Their memories live in scars, in the way they move, in the eyes that watch you across a field or a barn stall. They carry the past in silence, but that silence can echo louder than any accusation. Behind her, the slideshow flickered to life. Images of Midnight standing amid the smoky ruins after the fire, the scars along his flanks, the first gentle touch Savannah had offered him, and later, horses from other rescues, each with a story written in posture and gaze. The audience was rapt, some leaning forward, others dabbing at their eyes. Savannah told them of her arrival at the sanctuary, her own brokenness, and how she had tried to rebuild her life by caring for creatures who seemed as lost as she was. She described her first meeting with Midnight, his silent retreat to the corner of the stall, the months it took for him to trust her enough to stand by her cabin window through the night. Each detail painted not just a portrait of recovery, but of the quiet, resilient intelligence that lived inside the horse who had become her friend and, ultimately, her witness. "I used to think justice lived in courtrooms," Savannah continued. "I thought if you could just tell your story, show the right evidence, the truth would win. But what I learned from Midnight is that justice is more than evidence. It's the act of listening to those who can't raise their voices, who can't speak for themselves, but who remember everything. When no one else would listen, Midnight remembered for me. He carried the truth in his body and his behavior, in the places he returned to, in the way he reacted to voices he feared." She paused, letting the silence hang, then pressed the clicker again. A photo appeared. Midnight chained outside the burned stable, smoke swirling around him, his eyes wild but alive. Next to it, a shot of midnight leading Tyler and the team to the collapsed hayshed where the truth had been buried, both literally and metaphorically. "Animals don't lie," Savannah said softly. "People can be pressured, threatened, or paid to forget. Evidence can disappear. But a horse doesn't forget the sound of a cruel voice or the scent of fire. And when the world turns away, sometimes it takes the loyalty of a silent witness to bring justice into the light." In the quanda that followed, a young veterinary student raised her hand. "Do you think Midnight ever understood what was happening to him? Did he know he was saving you?" Savannah smiled, thinking of all the nights she'd spent in the dark, whispering her fears into Midnight's mane, of how he had nudged the hidden evidence into her hand in the courtroom, and how he'd led her team to the place where Cole's secrets lay buried. "I don't know if he understood the details, but I know he understood fear. He understood kindness. And when you offer kindness to someone, animal or human, you open a door. Maybe all Midnight knew was that I stood with him when no one else would. And when my time came, he stood with me." There was a moment of thoughtful silence, then quiet applause. Later, as the conference drew to a close, Midnight was led onto the stage for a demonstration. Children watched wide-eyed as Savannah explained how trauma and trust lived side by side in every survivor, animal and human alike. Midnight let the smallest of the children stroke his nose, standing perfectly still, as if knowing how fragile trust could be, how powerful a gentle touch. As the crowd drifted away, Dr. Keene joined Savannah at the side of the stage. "You changed a lot of minds today," she said. "Not just about you and Midnight, but about the responsibility we have to those who can't speak." Savannah nodded, feeling the exhaustion of the last year mingling with hope. "Sometimes I think the only reason I survived all this was because I learned to listen, not just to what's said, but to what's left unsaid." "Justice isn't just about winning or losing in court," Dr. Keene agreed. "It's about learning to pay attention, to remember the ones who can't tell their stories. Midnight helped you. Maybe now he'll help others too." Before leaving, Savannah paused in the hallway, resting her forehead against Midnight's neck. "We made it, boy," she murmured. "You're more than a witness. You're a testament to what memory means, the kind the world needs to notice." As she walked out into the cool Denver afternoon, Savannah carried with her a profound sense of responsibility. Midnight had given her back her freedom, but more than that, he had given her a new purpose: to help the world listen more deeply, to see memory in every scar and every silent gaze. Justice, she knew now, was not just a verdict. It was the echo of truth that remained when all else was gone. And as she glanced back at Midnight, who watched her with calm, unwavering eyes, Savannah understood the greatest lesson of all. Sometimes, the most honest testimony is never spoken aloud, but is remembered and lived hoof by hoof, day after day, by those who never forget. A year had passed since the courtroom drama that changed the course of so many lives. The autumn sun cast long shadows over a stretch of Colorado grassland that now pulsed with new life and gentle purpose. Where there had once been fire-blackened fences and shuttered barns, now stood fresh timber gates and open fields, a place called Midnight's Stand. Savannah Monroe paused by the main entrance, her hand resting on the engraved wooden sign, feeling the grain under her palm. The sanctuary was real now, more than a dream or a memory. It was a living promise, built on the ashes of loss, watered by tears, and shaped by the hope that justice could outgrow the past. Behind her, the sound of horses drifted on the breeze, contented snorts, the steady thud of hooves on soft earth, and the laughter of children in the paddocks. Midnight, tall and proud, watched over the field, his black coat shining in the pale light. He had become both guardian and guide, his scars now badges of survival, his story a legend that drew visitors from far beyond Boulder. People came to see him, some out of curiosity, others seeking healing, many wanting to witness a living reminder that sometimes truth survives against all odds. The sanctuary's opening had drawn crowds, but the daily work was quiet and sacred. Savannah's days began before sunrise, leading volunteers through routines that balanced care with calm. Grooming, feeding, walking the grounds with horses who had seen more cruelty than kindness, more fear than hope. Every horse at Midnight's stand carried a story in its eyes and scars. Rescues from neglect, survivors of natural disasters, animals abandoned by a world too hurried to notice. But here they learned to trust again. Here they became teachers, too. The program Savannah designed was simple yet profound. Trauma survivor horses, like Midnight, were trained for therapy and witness support roles. With the help of Dr. Keene and a team of behavioral specialists, the sanctuary partnered with social workers and local agencies. Children who had survived abuse or loss were invited to read aloud in the barn or simply sit with the horses, learning the language of patience and silent strength. Veterans suffering from PTSD found comfort in grooming the horses and walking beside them in the wide, open fields. Midnight, always the sentinel, had a way of standing perfectly still when a visitor needed to weep or speak in hushed tones. It was as if he knew how important listening could be, even when no words were spoken. On a bright October afternoon, Savannah watched from the porch as a group of children arrived, nervous and clutching backpacks. A little girl named Ellie, small and shy with wide brown eyes, clung to a stuffed rabbit. She had barely spoken since her mother brought her to the sanctuary, traumatized by the aftermath of a violent home. Savannah knelt by her, voice gentle. "Would you like to meet Midnight?" Ellie nodded, barely above a whisper. Midnight, sensing the fragility in her, walked over without haste and lowered his head, nostrils flaring gently as if to say hello. Ellie reached out, hand trembling, and pressed it to his muzzle. The moment stretched, quiet, powerful, and filled with the possibility of trust reborn. Savannah watched as Ellie, still silent, led Midnight by the halter to a patch of grass and sat down. She began to read from a book, stumbling at first but gaining strength as Midnight stood calmly beside her, unflinching. The sight stirred a deep, quiet pride in Savannah's heart. Healing, she realized, was shaped by repetition, gentleness, and shared silence. It was not the loud victories that saved lives, but the small moments of connection, day after day. The sanctuary had become a place of renewal, not just for the horses, but for the people who visited. Parents and therapists spoke in hushed, grateful tones. Survivors came to leave behind burdens too heavy for words. Savannah often walked the fields in the evening, reflecting on the unlikely chain of events that had led her here. The wildfire, the lost financial logs, the impossible courage of one horse who remembered everything. What was nearly lost to injustice had become a pillar of hope for so many. At the annual open house, Savannah stood before a crowd of supporters, staff, and new volunteers. Her speech was not long or dramatic, but it was spoken from the heart. Midnight's stand exists because of those who refused to forget. We're here to listen, to learn the language of those who cannot speak for themselves, and to stand beside them, especially when the world turns away. Every horse here has a story, just as every person who comes through these gates carries scars of their own. Healing begins when we believe those stories matter. She paused, her gaze drifting to midnight as he stood with Ellie and another group of children. I ask you all, listen to the ones who can't raise their voice. Learn their language, stand beside them, because sometimes the most honest testimony is not spoken at all. Sometimes it's walked into the room, hoof, by those who never forgot. The crowd fell silent, a reverent hush broken only by the wind stirring the golden grass. Later that evening, as the sun dipped behind the Rockies and the sanctuary's lights flickered on, Savannah wandered out to the main pasture. Midnight stood at the far end, silhouetted against the last orange light of day. She walked to him, feeling the cool earth under her boots, the peace of the land she had fought so hard to reclaim. She leaned against Midnight's shoulder, resting her forehead against his mane. We did it, boy. We gave them a place to belong. We gave the truth a home. Midnight breathed out, steady and calm. In that moment, Savannah felt the full weight of what they had built together. A sanctuary not just for horses, but for all those whose pain was hidden, whose courage went unspoken, whose memories carried the burden of survival. And as she stood with her friend under the darkening sky, Savannah knew the lesson of their journey would echo for years to come. Justice wasn't just a verdict or a headline. It was the daily act of listening, of standing up for those who couldn't stand alone, of believing that every scar told a story worth hearing. Midnight's stand would endure, not because of one woman's strength or one horse's loyalty, but because truth, once remembered, could never truly be lost again. Sometimes the most honest testimony is walked into the room, hoof, by those who never forgot.